Shalom, peace and blessings. Welcome everyone to the Fourth Angels Learning Center. I'm Jadiel, and today we are on our Romans chapter 4 study class, and we're going to dissect this chapter. What we're going to do, if this is your first time watching, what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish the message that Paul had, whether it's a brand new message or whether he was confirming or being confirmed by the understanding of the Torah and the prophets. Was he reinstituting it, or I would say refreshing it in the minds of the people, the same way John the Baptist was? So what we want to do is we want to kind of prove that. We want to prove that Paul was teaching the Torah and the prophets with his own words rather than the words that someone has been interpreting for us. So we're going to be checking that out. We're on chapter 4. So if you haven't checked out the previous chapters, this is the book of Romans is one letter. So it's not a dissected letter by chapters. There isn't no chapters in the original manuscripts. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you connect each so-called chapters so that we could get the correct context and the correct understanding and revelation from it. So chapter 4 is going to be a little bit detailed. It centers around the idea of circumcision and its origin, which takes place in Genesis. So we're going to be going back and forth a little bit. We're also going to be disproving certain claims pertaining to the book of James and Paul as well. So let's get right into it. I hope that you guys have prayed and got your notes and you're ready for class. Let's pull up the scriptures. We're going to be at Romans chapter 4. We're going to read the first 7 verses so that way we can dissect these things in an orderly fashion. All right, and let's start. It says we're gonna look at the last verses of Romans chapter 3 just to see where we're going into. I think this is very important because there's a very important statement that Paul makes here at the very last verse of Romans chapter 3. He says this: do we make void the law through faith, or having faith? Does faith cancel out or erase or nullify or make the law of no importance or no value and no strength, right? Elohim forbid. We establish the law. And if you check out chapter 3 class, you'll see that we broke down this term establish, and it means to stand on. We stand on the law. We are built on the law. So with him saying that we do not make void the law, we do not void it out, we do not erase it, we stand on it. Let's go into chapter 4. So then he says we stand on the law. So what do we say then? That Abraham, our father, pertaining to the flesh, how did he find grace, right? It says, for if Abraham were justified by works, he hath whereof to glory, but not before Elohim. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed Elohim, and it was counted for him for righteousness. Now, to him that works is the reward not reckoned of grace. We're going to talk about that in a second. But of debt. This is a very important statement that we need to make sure we are grasping from Paul. Now, to him that works is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt. But to him that does not work, but believes on him that justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness, even as David also described the blessedness of the man unto whom Elohim imputes righteousness without works, saying, blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. So we're going to look at this verse. This is located in Psalms, in the book of Psalms. But we're gonna go back up and we're gonna break down these 7 verses, okay? So again, the last verse that we read, it says that the law is not voided out because of belief or faith. Okay, so belief or faith does not remove, eliminate, devalue, or does anything to the law. The law is established. We are standing on it. We are building on it. It is our foundation. So what are we going to say about Abraham pertaining to the flesh? How did he find Yah? So this is very important. How did he find grace? How did he find mercy from Yah? It wasn't because of his actions. This is talking about the very initial approach, the very initial interaction between Abraham and Yah. This is not talking about a person who's been following Yah for a long time, as James is talking about, which we're going to touch on later. This is talking about the very first initial interaction with Yah. How are you justified? The word justified means made right. How do you go from a sinner to being right in the eyes of Yah? How do you go from being a transgressor of the law to a righteous person, right? It says, if Abraham were justified or made righteous by his actions, he has something to glory about, and uh not to he doesn't have to give that glory to Yah, because he was justified by something that he did. You see that? He was made right by something that he did. What does the scriptures say? Abraham believed Elohim and it was counted for him for righteousness. So you see how he was made righteous, how he was made just. Because of his belief in Elohim, it was accounted to him for righteousness, meaning that Yah has approached him, removed his transgressions, and accepted his belief and gave him a clean slate in which he would begin to walk in righteousness. Many people are assuming that righteousness comes from doing something, but let me ask you guys a question. If you have already broken a commandment, how can keeping commandments make you righteous if you still broke a commandment? The commandments is already broken. Let me give you an example. If I commit adultery on my wife yesterday, and then today I just say, you know what, I'm just going to be faithful today. Me being faithful today does not erase the fact that I was unfaithful yesterday. Okay? Me being faithful today does not make me a faithful person when I was just unfaithful yesterday. You understand? What happens is, because of my breaking of the covenant between me and my wife, I have to confess and allow my wife to make that decision. If she wants to continue a covenant with me, broke the laws my whole life. So look at what it says here. So if there's something that Abraham did that allowed him to receive righteousness, then it's not by the gift of grace, which is the pardon and the enablement of Yah. So it says here, now to him that works, meaning that tries to obtain righteousness by actions, right? This is where the context is in chapter 2, justified by works. So the person that's made right by your actions is the reward, not by grace. See, grace is a gift from Yah. It's not based off of what you do. So if you are made just or right by your actions, then the reward is not reckoned by grace. The reward is debt to Yah, meaning that Yah owes you that reward. If you are made righteous because of the actions that you perform, then Yah owes you the reward because it's debt to him. He owes the debt to you. But if it's by grace, if it's a gift from Yah, if it's something that we cannot do, like you cannot erase your transgressions the day before. You cannot erase what made you unjust. You cannot erase what made you unrighteous. You can only be forgiven. You have to be cleansed. Yah has to show grace because your sins are against him, right? So this is very important. Abraham he wasn't made right in his initial relationship with Yah because of his actions towards Yah. Let's continue, because I want to bring us to James as well. It says here in verse 5, but to him that does not work, meaning that is not justified by his actions, but believes on him that justifies. You see that? So this is just a confirmation that this statement here, works not, is talking about being made righteous by works. Him that is not made righteous by works, but believes on him that makes righteous those who are ungodly. His faith is counted for him for righteousness. You see that? And then it says, even as David said, the blessedness of a man unto whom Elohim imputes righteousness without the works, without thinking that you can be justified by your works, saying, blessed are those whose iniquities are forgiven and those whose sins are covered. So there's a few things that I want to clear up, right? So Romans chapter 2 talks about it's not the hearers of the law that's righteous, that's justified, but the doers of the law, right? So now listen to the context here. In verse 12, it says, for as many as have sinned without the knowledge of the law shall also perish without the knowledge of the law. But as many as have sinned in the law or in the knowledge of the law or having the understanding of the law shall be judged by the law. For the hearers of the law are just before Elohim, but the doers of the law. See that? So the context here is not a person that's initially coming to Yah and believing in him. It's a person that already has knowledge of the law. A person that's already having knowledge of the law is only his maturity continues to grow as he trusts in Yah and obeys what he says or trusts in what he says. So if Yah gives a person that is in a relationship with him the law, then that person has to trust Yah and also trust that law, the words that come out of his mouth, his instructions. So this is not talking about a person that is just now coming into relationship with him. Matter of fact, he's talking about the nations in that regard. He's talking about the nations coming to that relationship with Yah without having an understanding of the law at the moment. Look what it says here. When the nations which have not the law or have not the understanding of the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these not having an understanding of the law are a law unto themselves. You see that? Which show the work of the law written in their hearts and their conscience bearing witness in their thoughts, that meanwhile accusing or excusing. So their conscience is being affected by the Ruach, the set apart spirit. And the spirit is leading them to kind of abide by what's in the instructions, even though they don't have knowledge of it, because they believe. So the spirit is leading them to that place of maturity. But a person who is in the law, as it says here in verse 12, is a person who's already knowledgeable. You understand? This is what James is talking about. So when Paul in verse chapter 4 is talking about this, he's talking about how did righteousness come to Abraham? Righteousness didn't come to him initially, right? Initially because he was obedient. He matured, his faith or his righteousness matured as he obeyed the words that, or trusted the words that Yah was giving him. Let's go to James real quick so that way we can see that correlation. Because there's a big confusion with Paul, even with chapter 4 and chapter 2. You know, sometimes people put the same words against each other. Like that's just, it's pointless to even try to read this that way. If you're already thinking Paul contradicts, you might as well toss the scriptures out. Don't read it. Like there's no point in reading contradictions. So look at what it says here. I want you to know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead. This is James chapter 2, verse 20. It says, was not Abraham our father justified by works? And then it says, when he offered Isaac upon his son on the altar. At what point was this? Was this at his initial relationship? When he came in contact with Yah, he was 75 years old. When he offered his son, he was over 100 years old. He was in a relationship with Yah for about 30 years. Let's look at this. It says, see that how faith wrought his works. You see that? Faith. When you initially have faith, he accounts it to you for righteousness, and then it wroughts work, or it produces actions. And it says, and by works or actions was faith made perfect. So this is how you mature in your faith. If I come to Yah and I trust him and I believe, he puts righteousness in my heart and in my mind by his spirit, then that spirit moves me, just as we read in Romans 2, it moves me to do the things that Yah instructs. And my actions continuously show my trust in Yah, or my faith, and it matures it and makes it perfect or complete. Let's continue. It says the scripture was fulfilled that said, Abraham believed Elohim and it was imputed for him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of Elohim. It's funny, it says, and he was called a friend of Elohim. Why? Because it says that he obeyed Elohim. It says that he obeyed Elohim. Let me show you a verse real quick. So it says, see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith alone. Faith only. You see that? Not by faith only. So he's justified by faith, and then it produces works, and then the works allows man to continuously be justified or be made righteous or mature in his righteousness. Or as it said here in verse 22, allow his faith to be made complete or perfect. So when it says that he was imputed righteousness and he was called a friend of Elohim, it's interesting. Me and my kids was reading about, I believe it was John 15, and it talked about laying your life down for your friends. But then he says something very important. He says that you are my friend if you do the things that I command you, right? Let's see if I can find that. There we go. John 15, verse 14. It says, you are my friends if you do whatever I command you. If you trust me and you do what I command you, you're my friend. So it's interesting how it said Abraham was a friend of Yah, and it gives this testimony of Abraham in Genesis chapter 26. It says, Abraham obeyed my voice. It's Genesis 26, verse 5. Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So this is what made him a friend of Yah. This is what completed or perfected his faith. It's because in his faith, he received righteousness and the spirit and enablement to walk in righteousness. And then when Yah commanded him, he obeyed the voice. This is the maturity of a follower of Yah. So when we get to Romans chapter 4, he's talking about the initial reception of righteousness. How do you start? How do you get it first? You get it first by faith. Then it enables you to produce actions. When Yah commands you to do something, you obey it because you trust him, because you believe him already. If you do not believe him, if you do not trust him, you will not obey. You will not obey. It doesn't matter if you think that the commandment is good, you will not obey if you do not trust Yah. So trust and faith and belief has to come first so he can account to you for righteousness. All right. So now David said, the blessedness of a man, Elohim imputes righteousness without works. Now, what is he referring to? Let's go to Psalms 32, and then we're going to read the next 7 verses. Let's go to Psalms 32. I hope you guys are following along. It says, blessed is the man whose transgressions is forgiven, whose sin is covered. It's interesting that he says that when you receive righteousness, there's something happening simultaneously. Like I said, you cannot just become righteous after you done transgressed Yah's commands. You have to be forgiven of that which is transgressed in order to be made right again. So it says, blessed is he whose transgressions is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Verse 2, blessed is the man to whom Yah imputes not iniquity, and in whose spirit is no guile, or mind is no guile. Look at what it says here. These words is what? What did it say? David is describing the blessedness of a man when Yah gives you righteousness without your actions. And he gives you righteousness when he forgives you of your transgression. When he removes your unrighteousness, he can give you righteousness. He cannot give you righteousness while you are unrighteous. Messiah made this very clear in one of his parables. He says he does not put new wine in old wine skins. He has to make you new first before he puts new wine in you. He puts new wine in the new vessel. He puts his spirit in a new mind and a new heart. He does not put it in an old vessel. So likewise, the blessedness of faith is that by faith you receive righteousness, and at the same time, he removes iniquities and sin. It's simultaneous. The removal of sin is the reception of righteousness. The removal of iniquity is the reception of his ruach, his spirit. Let's continue. We're going to look at verse 8 to 14. It says here, blessed is the man to whom Yah will not impute sin. Now, this blessedness, does it come to the circumcision only? Or does it come, or is it on the uncircumcision also? For we say that faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness, right? So how was it reckoned? How was it given to Abraham when he was in circumcision or in uncircumcision? Not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. This is when Yah gave him righteousness. So he received the sign of circumcision. I was going to give you the purpose of this instruction. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had, yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised. You see that? That righteousness may be imputed unto them also. Same way it was to Abraham, it will be imputed to them also. Same way righteousness was given to Abraham, and the same way righteousness is given to the nations. That's why you see many people in the New Testament, many people from different nations receiving the Ruach in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. You see many people becoming, entering into covenant with Yah before circumcision, but they could not partake in certain things unless they were circumcised, such as the Passover meal. Look at what it says in verse 12. The father of the circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had from the beginning, being uncircumcised. This is very important because Messiah brings this up to the people that say that they are children of Abraham in John chapter 8. And we're going to look at that in a second. It says, for the promise that he should be the heir of the world. We're going to talk about that too, because it's interesting. People refer to Canaan as the promise, but the promise is that he's the inheritor of the world. So it says that for the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not only to Abraham and his children through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if they which are of the law be the inheritors, then faith is void, meaning that it's pointless, it's useless. What's the point of faith if all I have to do is do certain things and I can get these promises? It says here, the promise is made of none effect if obedience to the law is what makes me an inheritor. Here's the thing. When you are a child of someone, you have a relationship, you are related to that person. Because you are related to that person, you have rights to an inheritance because of your relation to that person. because you are that person's son or daughter. You see that? So this is very important for us to grasp, because it's not, you do not become an inheritor because you obeyed or you did, you can go to these will offices and you'll see like the most rebellious child receiving an inheritance because of his relation to Yah. Now Yah says that his relation to you is based off of righteousness. He is able to impute into you his righteousness by his spirit, and by his spirit dwelling inside of you, you can be transformed into his son and daughter and reflect that. But let's go back to these verses, because I want to make sure that we can understand these verses. Okay, any questions that come up, because I understand why questions of other things will come up, because he's touching on so many different aspects to the Torah. And also to salvation. So if whatever questions come up that's not in line with these verses, email it to me, because I'm gonna have to stick to these verses right now. All right. So right here in verse 9, he talks about how did the blessedness come? Was the act of circumcision what made them righteous? No. Why was he saying that? Well, if you read the book of Acts, you can see the issues that they've been having dealing with people teaching uncircumcision to the nations. Look at how they taught it. Acts chapter 15, verse 1. Certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren, and they said, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be delivered. Meaning you cannot be delivered from sin, and you could not obtain righteousness. You see that? You could not be delivered from iniquity, and you cannot obtain righteousness. This is what deliverance is: to be delivered and cleansed from sin, and to be receiving the reception of righteousness. They're saying this cannot happen unless you are physically circumcised. This is the problem that they've been going through. Let's read verse 5. There rose certain of the sect of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses, referring to the sacrificial system, the cleansing, going to the temple and performing certain rites. This is what they were telling them leads them to salvation. But David didn't say that. Blessed is the man whose transgression is forgiven and sin is covered, right? And Paul is saying that this is when Abraham believed and it was accounted for righteousness. So this is why Paul is bringing up circumcision, because of what they were teaching. They were teaching that you have to be circumcised to be delivered and to receive righteousness. So he had to show Abraham received righteousness and he was delivered from his sins while he was uncircumcised. So he's like, how is this a consistent idea in Yah's mind? It cannot be a consistent idea. It is for a purpose. So verse 11 gives you the purpose. Circumcision is a seal, right, of the righteousness of the faith that Abraham had, being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, that they be not circumcised, even though they be not circumcised, that righteousness may be imputed to them. Now I'm going to need to show you this real quick. In Genesis chapter 17, he gives them the command of the covenant, the circumcision. And I want to tell you what it is, right? So he says here, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. No, it's not talking about him and the child that's being circumcised. Why? Because the child that's being circumcised is 8 days old. The child is not displaying any faith. It is not a token for his faith, right? It is not a sign of his faith. He's 8 days old. He can't even accept the covenant with Yah. What is this for? This is the covenant between Abraham and Yah. This is the sign to remind us of Abraham's covenant. Now, what was Abraham's covenant? Let me take you back to the covenant that he had. Let's go to Exodus chapter 12. Look what he says. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. A blessing to who? It says, I will bless them that bless you, curse them that curse you. And then look what it says. In you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. This was 75 years before Genesis 17. I'm sorry, 25 years. He was 75 years old here. 75 years old. It says right here in verse 4. So when he was given a promise that he will be a blessing, that all the families of the earth will be blessed by him. So this is the token of the faith that he had, that he, what? Let's come back here, that he would be the father of all them that believe, right? That he will be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Let's continue. It says, the father of the circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only. So he could be the father of not only them who were circumcised, but who walk in the steps of faith of our father Abraham. Now, let's talk about circumcision. People that were circumcised, when they walked contrary to faith, who did Messiah say they were the children of? I know you guys remember this. So we can clearly see in verse 33 of John 8, it says, we are Abraham's seed, and we were never in bondage of any man. How do you say that you're going to make us free? Remember, free from transgression, delivered from transgression. Then he says here, it says here, verse 39, if you were Abraham's children, then you would do the works of Abraham. But you're trying to kill me, a man that has told you the truth, and which I heard from Elohim. Abraham did not do this. You do the deeds of your father. Then they said that Elohim was their father. And he said later on in verse 44, you are of your father, the devil. So even though they are Abraham's children by blood, their actions made them children of the devil. Even though they were circumcised in their bodies, which was the sign of Abraham's faith, they did not have or display Abraham's faith because it did not wrought the works that Abraham's faith worked inside of him. You understand? So this is why circumcision was fulfilled in Messiah, because when Messiah came, he made Abraham, those who believed in Messiah, he made Abraham the father of all nations, because the covenant is Abraham's. Even though Messiah came, the covenant is Abraham's covenant. So Messiah was supposed to be a light to the nations, and the light to the nations was supposed to be the blessing of Abraham to the nations, that he will be a blessing, as we read in Genesis 12. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 49. This one is going to be a little bit deep because it's a lot of elements that has to be simplified. We're trying to simplify it. Look what it says here. There we go. Verse 6. And he said, it is a light thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob, to restore and the preserved of Israel. And I will also give you for a light to the nations. You will be the light to the nations, that you may be my salvation unto the end of the earth. So it's interesting how this individual is going to raise up Israel, and then he is going to be the light to the nations. This is the blessing of Abraham. So this is why we get to Galatians chapter 3, verse 29, and it says, if you belong to Messiah, then you are Abraham's children and heirs according to the promise. Make sure you write these down. Let's go back to Romans 4 and let's read the rest of the chapter, starting at verse 15. So it says here, because the law works wrath, for where there's no knowledge of the law, there's no knowledge of transgression. That's what this is talking about. It's not saying that there's no law, there's no transgression. There's still transgression. There's no such thing as there's no law. If Yah gives the law, there's no such thing that there's no law. But if you don't have knowledge of the law, then you don't have any knowledge of transgression. Therefore, it is by belief that it might be by grace. To the result, the promise might be sure to all the children, not to them only that know the law, but to that also which have the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. See, this is not our covenant. I'm not a father of many nations. This is only one person. It's only one person that's the father of many nations. So he says, I have made you a father of many nations before him whom he believed, Elohim, who quickened the dead or made the dead alive, and called those things which were not as if they were, who against hope believed in hope. Abraham believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations according to that which was spoken. So shall your children be. And being not weak in the faith, right? Abraham considered not his own body now dead when he was about 100 years old, and not even considering the deadness of Sarah's womb. And he staggered not at the promise of Elohim through unbelief, right? But was strong in faith, giving glory to Elohim while he waited, being fully persuaded that Yah is able to fulfill or to perform that which he promised. You see that? Therefore, it was imputed to him for righteousness. It was established in him for righteousness. Yah put righteousness in him. So it says, now it was not written for them alone, but it was imputed to him, but also for us, to whom it shall be imputed. So he's also imputed it into us by faith, by belief. If we believe on him that raised up Yahushua, our master, from the dead, if we believe in Yah, believe in his word, if you believe in his promises, and you believe that Yah raised up his son from the dead, who delivered us from our offenses and was raised again for our righteousness or righteous establishment. We are delivered from our offenses. There's no action, there's no circumcision, there's no law that you can perform that makes you righteous after you transgressed Yah's laws. You have to come back in reconciliation with Yah. You have to be forgiven, cleansed by the one who's offering you this covenant. You can't do whatever you want in this covenant. If I make a covenant with my wife and I break the covenant with my actions, I can't the next day just start keeping the covenant. I already broke it. She has to reestablish her covenant with me. She has to determine if she wants to continue in a covenant with me or if she wants to move on. This is how it works. You see, so when we're approaching the circumcision, circumcision was given to Abraham. A child had to be circumcised at 8 days old. It had nothing to do with his faith at all. It had everything to do with a symbol, a sign that has to represent Abraham's promise that he was going to be the father of many nations. And the actions that is produced by faith is a manifestation that you are Abraham's children. When you obey Yah's Torah, when you obey his word, when you obey his law, when you obey everything he says, this is what manifests that you are Abraham's seed. This is what manifests that you are a believer in Messiah. So this is very important for us to understand, that we are made right initially by our belief. And then that belief produces the obedience that matures our righteousness, that matures our faith. It matures our relationship with Yah. It's the same thing when we get into a covenant with our spouses. We get into a covenant, we get married, and then we mature in our relationship with our spouses. We don't stay the same. It's a big mistake. People keep telling you run back to those honeymoon stages. No, move forward towards perfection, move forward towards completion, move forward towards maturity. Don't go back trying to go back to the club with your wife and try to dance and all of that. Sure, dance, yeah, dance at home. It's time to move forward to maturity. This is the same thing with our relationship with Yah. When we go back, when we move away from Yah, we go back to our first love. It's not saying go back to the beginning stages. It's saying go back to that relationship, the relationship that you had. And Yah wants us to be matured. In our actions, we display a maturity of our faith. And this is what James and Paul is talking about. They're talking about two different aspects of faith. The faith that comes in the very beginning of your relationship, and James is talking about the faith that matures as you are already in a relationship with Yah. So I hope that this was clear. Look forward to the next class. Praise Yah. See you at Romans chapter 5. Shalom, everyone.